So Jurassic World The Ride opened on July 12th, 2019, and had its grand opening ceremony on July 22nd, 2019. And obviously, as you can tell, I am late to talk about this.
I'm late for a very important date.
But that's okay, right? Because I've learned a lot more information about the ride, and I've gotten more chances to kind of sink in all the information which other people who have made their videos earlier didn't get to do. Right? That's a good thing, right? Anyways, with that being said, this video is going to be a little bit different than most other ones, as I'm going to kind of go based on the expectations. So essentially, how does this final version of the ride, or somewhat final version of the ride, stand up to what our expectations for the ride were based on the trailer and the promotional materials, and just playing out what we wanted from the ride? So I'm going to take us step by step through each of the major scenes in the ride that we had major expectations for, and see how the final version of the ride stands up to it, as well as whether or not it surpassed expectations, met expectations, or fell below expectations. So let's start with the Mosasaurus scene, the opening scene of the ride. The expectation that I think most people had going into this was just to make the Mosasaurus and its tank feel as real as possible despite the limitation of screens. So let's just start off with what surpassed our expectations in this scene. The first thing has to be the fact that the graphics are amazing. I think it's the best CGI I've seen in a theme park attraction ever. I mean, you just compare this to Forbidden Journey and that dragon that we saw. Like, this is like 100 times better than the CGI used in that ride. Another thing would have to be just how wet you get in this scene. I mean, I felt like the original ride, you didn't get wet in too many scenes, and you get absolutely soaked in this scene in this new ride. And I feel like that's a really great addition to make it a better overall water ride. And then finally, I think by using the great white shark in the beginning and having him get eaten by the Mosasaurus is a great way of showing just how massive this beast is. And by using the screens, it really gives us a great sense of just how massive this guy is and why we should be afraid of him. So as far as what just straight up met expectations, there's really only one thing I could think of, and that's that the Mosasaurus interacts with the environment, right? We want to make him feel real in the space, and I feel like they achieved that with having him splash around the water and hit the screen and whatnot. So that's a good touch. As far as what fell below expectations, we have a bit of stuff to talk about. For one, water does not come out of the screen when the Mosasaurus cracks the glass like we were inferring from the trailer that they put out. And also, the boat does not shake like we saw in the trailer. So basically what this means is the trailer was just an over-sensationalized version of the final ride, which is a shame because it definitely ended up bringing our expectations way higher than they should have been for this scene. And then the other point here is that the screens tend to be a bit too bright at certain points during the day. And I think this ended up being kind of a give or take situation with Universal. They realized that at certain points in the day you couldn't really see the screen that well, so they decided to brighten it, even if that kind of ruined the immersion of the tank. I honestly think they made the right choice here, because if you couldn't see it, then what would have been the point of the immersion of the tank, really? But that being said, it still does fall below expectations in that category. So with that being said, let's move on to the next scene, which is the Predator Cove scene. And in this scene, we don't really have a whole lot of expectations because we didn't really know what to expect in the first place coming in. But basically, we want to achieve what Jurassic Park The Ride scene here achieved, which was just to build a sense of suspense and dread using active set pieces once we start building up to the climax and finale of the ride. Now, despite our low expectations, this part of the ride managed to somehow fall short. So the only thing I have here that surpassed expectations was the fact that they had screens with Jurassic World characters on them, further detailing the plot. That's really about it. So as far as what actually just met expectations, the Indominus Rex breakout, claw marks, and blood is all a nice touch, and the refurbished pen is obviously nice, but there's really not much else going on here that meets our expectations. Now, as far as what came below expectations, well, for one of our expectations was that, there's a lot of activity going on in this scene. There's no activity whatsoever going on here. There's very low activity. Aside from the Raptor Pen, which was already there in the Jurassic Park ride, there's really not much else going on here. I mean, we don't have the falling car anymore, which, for the last few months of the ride, it was just the floating car. But still, that's gone, and we don't even have the spinning Dilophosaurus anymore. He's been moved. It just feels very empty and very devoid of life. Speaking of devoid of life, let's talk about those dead pterodons that look like they came straight from Party City and are just absolutely, unequivocally unconvincing, and just turn the scene into an entire joke, really. And instead of it being a suspenseful moment, it ends up being a complete and utter joke. Now, I already mentioned the lack of the spitting Dilophosaurus here, but there's no animatronics to be found whatsoever in the scene. I mean, a big thing that I was preaching about this ride and why it would be better than Jurassic Park The Ride was that it was going to have refurbished animatronics and more animatronics in general, and yet one of the major scenes of the ride is completely devoid of them. So it's definitely a very strange scene, and I would say this scene in particular definitely does fall below expectations. Now moving on to our next scene, which is of course the lift hill / the first drop, that we're kind of just expecting it to use animatronics for jump scares and then of course fix or replace that T-Rex animatronic. That's kind of the big things here. We don't know what to really expect from it. We're just expecting that it gets improved and is used in a similar light. So I'm going to come right out and say it. This scene surpasses our expectations. Now that might just be because we had low expectations because we didn't know what to expect in this scene, but it absolutely nails it. For one, the ceiling raptor returns, and he actually has a purpose this time. He's holding wires, and he essentially is the reason why the power goes out, which is awesome. The fact that he actually serves a purpose in the plot is amazing. We have Chris Pratt showing up, helping us learn more about the plot instead of some just random guy talking over the loudspeaker. The spitting Dilo returns, now refurbished in a better location. Speaking of a better location, we now have the T-Rex habitat instead of that warehouse, which is way more Jurassic Park or Jurassic World than the warehouse was. I mean, I tell you that much. And it looks amazing. And then also there's this one little lighting effect as you go down that first drop. I mean, it's a simple thing, but it's basically the backup lights coming on, the generator popping in. That's amazing. And then finally, the one thing we've all been waiting for, they did refurbish the T-Rex head and they changed it to the Indominus Rex head, and it looks amazing. So honestly, I have nothing that met expectations here, so we're just going to move on to what it had fall below expectations. Which honestly is just one thing, and that's that the Indominus Rex head does not move a whole lot. It's still very limited, just like the T-Rex head was. And it's a little unfortunate, but I think it still looks really good, and I think the dark lighting around it is definitely a lot more effective with the slow movement than it was in Jurassic Park The Ride when you had a lot more lights going on. So let's move on to the final major scene of the ride, and that's the finale. So basically, we already kind of knew from leaked images what this scene was going to be. So what we're expecting is a final epic battle between the Indominus Rex and the T-Rex. And hopefully the T-Rex saves us and we go down the final drop. That's pretty much it, right? So despite that pretty basic expectation, it ends up being kind of a mixed bag of emotions for most people. And we'll start with what surpassed expectations. The T-Rex habitat, of course, returning looks amazing. And also, Blue walking? Are you kidding me? That's actually insane. Like, we weren't necessarily 100% sure whether or not Blue was going to show up in this ride in the first place. And the fact he shows up looks that good, and his walking is amazing. Now, as far as what met expectations, of course, they did refurbish the T-Rex, which is what we expected, and the drop is still great. They didn't change it at all. Okay, now moving on to what fell below expectations. Well, for one, the Indominus Rex is obviously very limited, and we don't see his full body. The rumor behind this is that he's not complete, and that this is just a stand-in animatronic while they get the final one ready. Hopefully this is actually true because, honestly, as it stands right now, the battle between the T-Rex and the Indominus Rex is not very obvious, and we don't really get a good view of him at all. The rumor is that this change and this new animatronic should be coming in the January refurbishment, so, I'm not the biggest fan of it. I would have liked that to have been out with the opening of the ride, but it's all good so long as it gets there eventually. And the final underachievement I have here is that occasionally the T-Rex's timing is off, but I think it's just because they have the backup Indominus Rex in. I think once the final one is in, that should be worked out. So all in all, does this ride live up to expectations? And to be honest, I don't think it does. I think it comes up short of expectations, but I do think that maybe in some areas our expectations were a bit high. In the case of Predator Cove, I don't think that was the case at all. But despite this, I still would recommend you to get out to Universal Studios Hollywood and ride this ride because it still is a really good ride, even if it didn't live up to our extremely high expectations. And I still think it's a fantastic step in the right direction for Universal Studios Hollywood and for us getting away from the solely screen-based economy that we seem to be living in the theme park world. So that being said, let me know what you thought about the ride in the comments, and I'll see you guys next time.